Hi, everybody. My name is Joe Robbins. I am the Program Manager for Disabilities Inclusion here at the URJ. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, the fourth call in the Mental Health Learning Opportunities series. Today's webinar, the short title is Including Individuals with Psychiatric Disabilities, and we are very excited to have Dr. Mark Salzer from Temple University here with us today. I will let him introduce himself and tell you more about what he does, but he has a strong focus among the other work on including people with disabilities in the Jewish community, and he brings a lot of different backgrounds in addition to his academic backgrounds and experience to approaching this vital issue. So we're happy to have him here today and bring a clinical presence in addition to some of the great other presences that we've had so far through these calls. If you're joining us for the first time today, this call will start with Mark giving us a presentation around 40 minutes long, and then we'll have a Q&A session afterwards. So without further ado, I'm pleased to hand over the presentation to Dr. Mark Salzer.
Joe, thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. I think you've unmuted me, and now I'm starting my video. There we go. I think you all hopefully see me now. It's a pleasure to at least be seen by everybody. As Joe mentioned, my name is Mark Salzer. I'm Professor and Chair of Rehabilitation Sciences at Temple University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I want to start out by saying how thankful I am to Joe and URJ for their interest in this particular topic. I'm very excited to be able to talk with you today about community inclusion, community integration of individuals with psychiatric disabilities in our Jewish community. This is a topic that is very important to a lot of us, and something that I actually became introduced to a number of years ago. I was in graduate school, actually before I went to graduate school to become a clinical psychologist. I worked at a locked psychiatric inpatient unit in Minneapolis, where I grew up, Minneapolis, Minnesota. And one day I was making the rounds on the unit. My job was a psych tech, and part of what I was supposed to be doing was going around to the different rooms where the patients on the unit were sleeping in, and I would make sure that people were on the unit and hadn't left. It was a locked unit for people who had made suicide attempts or otherwise weren't necessarily taking care of themselves and at risk for imminent harm. And I knocked on the door of a young woman who had recently been admitted for a suicide attempt, and knocked on her door and there was no answer, knocked on the door again, no answer, and finally went into her room, as I was required to do, to make sure she was there. And she was on her bed crying hysterically, harder than I'd ever heard somebody cry in their life. And my first thought was, she's suicidal, she wants to kill herself, she's so depressed, she doesn't want to live anymore. I'm thinking about her as a patient, and I'm thinking about her symptoms. And I was thinking about calling the doctor, calling the nurse. We have what are called codes, where everybody rushes in and tries to help out in a crisis. And I think fortunately I did the best thing, which was sat down next to her bed and just listened to her. And what I was expecting to hear her say is how depressed she is, or how much she wanted to kill herself, or how horrible her life was. And instead what I heard her talk about was how hard this recent hospitalization related to her depression, how hard it was going to be on her life. She had just started a new job. She was worried about losing that job as a result of her hospitalization. She had just gotten married. She was worried about what her husband was going to think of her. She was worried about what her family was going to think of her. She was worried about the same kinds of things I would worry about as a young adult at that age, and really maybe worry about now. What is my life going to be like? And she was talking about, she was worried about what her life was going to be like with a serious mental illness. And that really got me off in this particular area to try to understand what are the lives of individuals with serious mental illnesses, what is their community integration experiences, and how can we support people with serious mental illnesses to live in the community like everyone else, and in particular live in the community, live in religious and spiritual communities like everyone else. So what I'm going to be talking about today is what is community integration, community inclusion? What is the definition? What is the current state of community integration for people with serious mental illnesses? And by that I mean people diagnosed with schizophrenia spectrum disorder, bipolar disorder, major depression. What is the evidence base about the importance of community integration, and especially participation in religious and spiritual communities? And finally, what can religious and spiritual congregations do to support individuals with serious mental illnesses to live in the community like everyone else? So now I'm going to turn it over to my PowerPoint presentation. I'll be flipping back and forth as we talk today. So you'll see me some of the time, and you'll see the PowerPoints at other times. So let me start by, let me try to start by, here we go. I'm going to begin the slideshow again with the current definition of community integration. And what I mean by that, community integration refers to the opportunity to live in the community and be valued for one's uniqueness and abilities like everyone else. So the two key concepts here, one is opportunity. So we don't force people to participate. We don't force people with disabilities to work or go to school or date or parent or be engaged in religious or spiritual communities. What we do though is provide the opportunities so people can live and participate in those communities like everyone else. Community integration is a wonderful concept in my opinion because it's not just viewed as a nice value or belief. It's actually based in rights, and it's based in law here in the U.S. and also laws around the world. In particular in the U.S., we have something called the Americans with Disabilities Act that was signed into law in 1990, and the Americans with Disabilities Act essentially provides opportunities for people with all disabilities to live in the community and be valued for their uniquenesses and abilities like everyone else. In 1999, there was a Supreme Court Olmstead decision that fully applied the Americans with Disabilities Act to individuals with psychiatric disabilities, and in particular talked about the fact that unnecessary institutionalization, remaining in a state or county hospital, if somebody could successfully live in the community with proper supports, is a form of discrimination prohibited by the ADA. So community integration is a right for people with psychiatric disabilities as well as other disabilities. So what is the current state of integration for people with serious mental illnesses? The first thing I like to point out, and the first thing that sometimes people think about, is it has to do with deinstitutionalization, or fewer people with psychiatric disabilities living in state or county hospitals. And the good news is we have had some great success in that area with deinstitutionalization. In 1955, there were, that was the height of institutionalization of people with mental illnesses. There were about 550,000 people, American citizens with mental illnesses, who were in state and county hospitals in the United States. 1969, it went down to 370,000. And 2011, which is the last year of data that I typically present because it was gathered in a similar way to previous years, there were approximately 41,000 people still residing in state and county hospitals around our country. So in many ways, that's been a great success. There are more people living in the community than before. Unfortunately, individuals are not of the community like everyone else. We see this with research pertaining to housing. People with serious mental illnesses tend to live in segregated parts of their communities. So they're living in what are called psychiatric ghettos, or sometimes large board and cares, segregated spaces in communities where opportunities to interact with people without disabilities isn't always present. Individuals have lower educational attainment than the general population. This is particularly important in college. Individuals with serious mental illnesses are much less likely than the general population to graduate with associate's or bachelor's degrees. It likely or partially explains employment issues that individuals with psychiatric disabilities experience. They have approximately 85% unemployment, which is an incredible unemployment rate, which makes them financially dependent on entitlements. Approximately 40% of individuals who receive Social Security disability income receive it because of a mental health or a psychiatric disability reason. So they're the largest group receiving SSDI. They're also the group that's least likely to ever get off SSDI. About 1% of individuals who get on Social Security disability income ever get off. And while it's important to support people with these entitlements, especially when they have nothing, they've lost their job, they might be living on the streets, when we support individuals on SSDI, we're supporting people to live on approximately $1,100 a month, which puts them in poverty. And poverty is very difficult for anybody, including people who experience significant mental health issues. We know people with serious mental illnesses have limited social roles. That is, they have smaller social networks, fewer friends, report being more isolated than the general population, more lonely and isolated. And people experience less physical activity and engagement in leisure and recreational activities. Approximately 60 to 70% of the time that people diagnosed with schizophrenia spectrum disorders, bipolar disorder, major depression, 60% of their time is spent in what's called sedentary behavior. This means that they're sitting down or lying down, watching TV, doing things like that, and those types of behaviors are not good for health. So you see that I also talk here about limited attention to spiritual issues, limited encouragement to vote, limited opportunity to have voice. In almost every area of their lives, individuals with psychiatric disabilities are not of the community like everyone else. So why is this important? And why should we be paying attention to this in general, and why should we be particularly paying attention to this in the area of religious participation? First of all, when I typically talk to people about community integration of people with psychiatric disabilities, I will sometimes hear people say, well, that's all well and good, but the people that I work with or the person that I know is too ill because of their schizophrenia, for example, and they don't want to participate. They're not interested. They have certain symptoms of their illness that makes them unmotivated or makes them somehow uninterested in participating in different areas. Or they might say, the person or people that I work with, maybe they want to do this or think that they want to engage in my synagogue or in employment or go to college, but they couldn't possibly do this because they're too impaired. Or maybe they want to do this and they could do this, but they shouldn't do this. And the explanation for the shouldn't goes something like this. They will say that something like going to work causes stress. Stress leads to an exacerbation of symptoms. Exacerbation of symptoms leads to rehospitalization, and rehospitalization is a very, very bad thing. So we need to avoid that rehospitalization at all costs, which means discouraging people from participating in work, going to school, dating, parenting, religious participation, leisure recreation, because it could cause stress that might lead eventually to rehospitalization. Well, in all of these areas, the news is actually, the evidence is actually the opposite of that. So here you see some of the research talking about the fact that people with serious mental illnesses would participate in pretty much every area that I just mentioned before. The top 3 things that people with serious mental illnesses say they want in their lives are a good place to live, work. About 70% of people consistently say that they want a job, and intimate relationships. They want to date, they want to marry, they want to do the same things that everybody else wants to do. And in fact, these 3 things, these 3 areas should be very familiar to you, because they're the top 3 things that anybody wants in their lives when surveys like this are done with the general population. A good place to live, a job that brings them meaning in their lives, and intimate relationships. Of particular relevance to our conversation are the data about interests in religion or spirituality. Here I mentioned 2 studies, and I'm going to show you some more data in a second that, indicate that approximately 80% of individuals with serious mental illnesses say that they are very or extremely religious or spiritual. And what is interesting is that this is approximately the same percentage as the general U.S. population. When you ask individuals without mental illnesses how religious or spiritual they are, approximately 80% of the U.S. population says very or extremely religious or spiritual. So these aren't delusional issues. This isn't a fixation on religious issues because of psychotic process or manic process or something like this. This is fundamental to being an American citizen, and part of our culture is having religion and spirituality being important in their lives. These are data from a survey that we've done with approximately 120 individuals with serious mental illnesses who live in the Philadelphia area. Basically, the data that we gather are, we ask people in 26 different areas, these are all listed here, how many days they participate in each of these areas in the last 30 days. We ask them how important each of these areas is, and then we ask them, if it was important, do they do it less than they want, as much as they want, or too much, more than they want. And what I've highlighted in red here, and hopefully you can see this, the go to church, synagogue, or place of worship question, 90 people, or approximately 78%, indicated that this was important to them, to go to church, synagogue, or a place of worship. So that is about the same as the data that I presented here, about this 80% figure. So 78% said it's important. Of those individuals, 59% indicated that they do it less than they want. So 59% of the people who said that going to a church, synagogue, or place of worship was important to them said that they do it less than they want. And this is really, for me, the primary driver to my interest, and I think our interest, in supporting people in our religious congregations. And again, what I'm referring to is not making sure that we provide spiritual counseling or mental health services to individuals. It's helping support people being full members of our religious congregations and be able to participate just like everyone else. In terms of the could question, again, there's people out there who say that maybe individuals want to do this, but they might be too ill or too impaired, too disabled to participate. And basically, I'm not going to go into this in a lot of detail, but there are a number of practices out there, a number of interventions that have been developed to support people with some of the most significant impairments in the areas of housing and employment and education and other areas of their lives. So we do have some evidence-based practices that are very beneficial in helping people participate in a lot of areas that some individuals might think they would be too impaired to participate in. Finally, in terms of the should question, should people with serious mental illnesses participate in the area of religion and spirituality as well as these other areas? All of the research that I pulled together on employment and education and physical activity, leisure, recreation, marital or intimate relationships, suggests that participating in all of those areas is associated with positive health, mental health, and personal well-being benefits for individuals with serious mental illnesses. Here on this slide, you see some of the studies, some of the evidence pertaining to religious or spiritual participation. Those individuals who report being more religious or spiritual and participating in those areas report greater psychological well-being, fewer psychiatric symptoms, greater hope and empowerment, and feelings of inclusion. It provides people with a sense of meaning and purpose that enhances their lives. So one can clearly argue that people with psychiatric disabilities who are interested in participating in religious communities should be supported in those areas. Not only is it the law, but it's also something that's beneficial for individuals as well. So what are some frameworks for promoting community inclusion, or how do we go about making this happen? The first thing that we need to think about is a perspective on what does it mean to have a disability, okay? Traditionally, when we've talked about disability, we've talked about what is commonly called the individual model of disability. And the individual model of disability views the impairment and lack of functioning or participation, so going to work, going to school, dating, and the challenges in doing those things, as being something inherent within the individual who has the impairment, okay? So the example here, John has schizophrenia. That is why John doesn't work, because it's something associated with having this diagnosis and the impairments associated with it that leads John to not be able to work. So John is disabled, okay? The type of interventions that you developed from that perspective would be things that target John's impairments. So you do something about his cognitive functioning, or the extent to which he has symptoms, hallucinations and delusions, or cognitive functioning issues, social skill problems, problem solving impairments. You somehow fix John, and then John eventually will be able to work. The other more modern perspective on disability actually views disability, it's actually called the social model of disability. It views disability as resulting from a person-environment interaction that limits opportunities for participation like everyone else. So I was trying to figure out a way to, stop share, there we go. So here we go. So now you get to see me a little bit. So this perspective actually has John right here. Here's John's uniquenesses and abilities. Here's the environment, let's say an employment setting. And the way that the social model of disability views disability is it's this mismatch that leads to the lack of John's working. Okay, it's not just because necessarily John has schizophrenia, it's that John's uniquenesses don't interact well with the environment, and that's why John's not working. Okay, my favorite example actually of this is I have a colleague named Fred Fries, who is a very well known in the mental health field, has been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and also is a clinical psychologist. He talks about having a uniqueness whereby he does not look people in the eye very easily when he talks with them. So his social skills are different than the general population, I guess. And if Fred were to go to a work environment and go to a job interview, and if they said, oh, we don't hire people who can't look somebody in the eye or have appropriate social skills, we're not going to give that person a job, or we're not going to keep them in the job, or something like that, that creates the disability then. It's not something inherent within Fred or other people with social skill differences. It's something about the environment not accommodating or welcoming that uniqueness. So from a social model of disability perspective, we can try to fix the person with the disability or the person with schizophrenia and fix their skills or their symptoms or something like this, or we could do something about the environment to make the environment more accommodating and welcoming of the uniquenesses that somebody like Fred Fries or other individuals diagnosed with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or major depression might have. So it's this notion of person-environment fit, and we can intervene at the person and at the environment levels. And that will drive a lot of the rest of our discussion here. So let me go back to the PowerPoint. See if I can make this work. Share the screen. Here we go. All right. So there you have that new paradigm. So what are some things that are impairments associated with serious mental illnesses that might limit inclusion in religious congregations in particular? It certainly might be symptoms like depression or demoralization, which is a loss of hopefulness that sometimes people experience, or paranoia that might make people isolate or not want to go to a religious congregation. There might be interpersonal skills challenges. There might be different behaviors, both social skills, ways that people interact. There might be odd ways of thinking or talking or something like that. ADLs refer to activities of daily living. Somebody's grooming, bathing, how disheveled they are, how they dress might be different. And cognitive functioning. This is somebody's how they think, their memory and how they think, how clearly they think and put things together. These are all possible impairments that could limit participation in religious congregations. These are all things that treatments, medications, therapies, different types of interventions certainly can target to address those kinds of things. But again, we can also try to target some of these same issues by addressing environmental barriers and lack of inclusion that might keep people from fully participating. And I'm going to focus on some of these barriers that we know exist to community integration in the larger population, and we also have evidence that they exist in religious communities as well. First of all, we're all familiar with the concept of stigma. I actually prefer the term prejudice and discrimination to stigma. Discrimination is real and pervasive for individuals with serious mental illnesses. We have very good evidence that discrimination occurs in the areas of housing, where a landlord might not rent to somebody in particular or be more inclined to kick somebody out of an apartment if they know that they have a serious mental illness. We know that discrimination occurs in the areas of employment. I have heard plenty of anecdotes about discrimination that occurs in educational settings, in colleges and universities, whereby a student comes forward with a serious mental illness. It is my sense that that student is not encouraged to remain enrolled at that particular college or university, sometimes just the short term, sometimes long term. And we know that there's some evidence of discrimination even in religious communities. I have a colleague here in Philadelphia named Ram Kannan, who did a study where he surveyed 300 and some odd religious congregations in the Philadelphia area and asked them to rank which populations they were more likely to work with, juvenile delinquents, single mothers, teenage mothers, people who use drugs and alcohol, homeless populations. He consistently found that religious congregations were least interested, at the very bottom of the list of people that they wanted to work with, were individuals with serious mental illnesses, at the very bottom of the list. They were more interested in working with other populations. I also have a good friend who has been diagnosed with schizophrenia, has some behavioral manifestations associated with that. He has what's called tardive dyskinesia, and he was attending a Bible study group. And two members of the Bible study group found out that he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, went up to the study group leader and said, look, this person, they shouldn't be in this group. Either they go or we go. And thankfully, the Bible study group leader said, well, I'm sorry to see you leave, but I think you're going to have to go. So thankfully, my friend was able to stay in. But I don't think that these examples are so rare, unfortunately. We know that exclusion exists also in terms of laws, and this is just a listing of state laws around the country that limit the rights of individuals with mental illnesses or people viewed as incompetent to participate in lots of different ways: voting, holding public office, being on a jury. We also know that mental health providers have attitudes and beliefs about people with serious mental illnesses that are similar to the general population, and that means not great. So discrimination, prejudice absolutely exists, and I would argue it definitely exists in religious settings as well. So what can we do about this? First of all, I think it's important for us to be educated about all the different ways in which people might experience barriers to inclusion in religious settings and in synagogues and other types of religious settings. This is an article from Carter in 2007 where they laid out 5 different types of barriers that people might experience in religious congregations. The first is architectural barriers. Those typically have to do with individuals, especially with physical disabilities, people who might be using a wheelchair. That is a little less of an issue for individuals with psychiatric disabilities. Some of the top ones are attitudinal barriers. This includes that prejudice and discrimination about people with differences, and especially people with mental illnesses. So this is one type of barrier that people might experience. Communication barriers is another type of experience that people with psychiatric disabilities might particularly feel. And this is because for some illnesses, like schizophrenia in particular, there seems to be a hypersensitivity and to sound and noise in particular. So there might be some ways that that religious ceremonies occur that might limit the full participation of somebody diagnosed with schizophrenia in particular. So these are some community barriers for you to be thinking about, and think about how they might apply to people with serious mental illnesses. This is a listing that Griffin pulled together in 2012 of some characteristics of inclusive faith communities pertaining to individuals with disabilities, and that those faith communities that had these characteristics were the ones that were more likely to include people with disabilities, including psychiatric disabilities, in their congregations. So they were more likely to have faith leaders who were committed to this topic. They used educational resources to address disability-related issues. So in our case, they talk about mental health issues. That's a topic of conversation, not something that's hidden in the congregation. They talked about people with disabilities positively in their religious teachings, so give examples as much as possible about people with mental health issues as they talk about religious issues. Having strong ties to disability organizations, so reach out to local mental health organizations, for example, and had a stronger orientation towards promoting social justice. I'm actually going to turn to very briefly to some specific things that congregations can consider in promoting full inclusion of individuals. The first is to enhance the congregation's knowledge, contact, and collaborations with individuals with serious mental illnesses, as well as organizations that work with and support and are led by people with serious mental illnesses. There's something called mental health first aid, which provides basics for lay people, non-mental health professionals, in what are mental illnesses, what are the symptoms associated with it, what are some of the basic treatments and resources and services available for people with mental illnesses, and how do we as a community in general talk about mental illnesses, and how do we approach people and have conversations with people without feeling bad about that, or having reservations about having those conversations. Some congregations have moved to having routine conversations about mental health issues. I know some congregations in the Philadelphia area that have at least yearly, if not more often, conversations, half-day conferences or seminars or sessions talking about mental health issues and the importance of supporting people in the congregations. What that does as well is the more contact with individuals with mental health issues who talk about their experience with schizophrenia, yet the importance of being part of the Jewish community, that reduces stigma. That kind of interaction reduces prejudice and discrimination. And finally, having engagement with consumer, family, advocacy organizations, mental health organizations to maintain a dialogue and look for opportunities to enhance mental health awareness and partnerships with these other organizations can be incredibly helpful. The other thing that congregations or that has happened to support people with psychiatric disabilities has been to create alternative settings. In particular, this might have to do with having video cameras within the main areas where religious services are taking place and broadcasting that out in quieter places. So for somebody who gets overly stimulated by large groups or large populations, if they're able to watch the ceremony by video camera, that might still enhance their participation. If somebody gets particularly agitated during a religious ceremony, they can be walk out and still maintain contact by watching it being broadcast. I also have a picture here of a Beit Midrash that's in Jerusalem. This is actually a unique, separate setting that these individuals created. That's me on the right-hand side. And this is in the Orthodox community in Jerusalem where young men were not being included in the other religious educational institutions in Jerusalem because of their mental illnesses. And this was a separate setting that was set up just for these young men to be able to learn and be a student like their peers and feel like they were contributing and being a part of the religious communities, even if they weren't included in mainstream religious communities. So this is one example. I think it's good, but I also have concerns about it being a segregated setting as well. But for the time being, it's better than nothing. There's this notion of Befrienders Ministry. Basically what this is training within religious congregations of individuals, natural supporters, other congregants who agree to support people with disabilities to be a full part of their religious congregations. So this isn't just targeted at individuals or supporting individuals with psychiatric disabilities, but it's people with physical disabilities, sensory disabilities, intellectual and developmental disabilities. And the idea is to provide training to these lay congregants and talk to them about what kinds of supports that they can offer. And then I believe there's a type of matching process with individuals who want support to be involved in the community. So these are individuals who would welcome somebody to the congregation, stay in touch with them, work with them if problems arose, and overall do anything that they can to support their full participation. And finally, really these last models, I call them other support models. It's really the idea, it's similar to the Befrienders Ministry. The idea is to provide or create a congregation that's fully welcoming, where other congregants are working with family members, working with the rabbi, working with neighbors, whomever, to support that person to participate in the religious community. This is a notion called circles of support. The individual with psychiatric disability would say, hey, I'm interested in participating in this congregation. These are the people who I'd like to help me and support my participation, and that would be the circle of support, who would be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to support the individual to participate. Behavioral contracting refers to working with an individual with a psychiatric disability with known issues that might disrupt a religious service and developing a contract with them. If this happens, this is what we will do. If you get up during the middle of a ceremony or are disruptive, here's what we all agree to do. you will agree to leave. 2 other people will go with you to provide support until you calm down or other things get better, and then you're able to come back. So there's what's called behavioral contracting that you can talk about and do before particular incidents occur. So that's behavioral contracting. And some congregations around the country are also moving towards helping families fully participate in congregations, families of individuals with serious mental illnesses who might feel excluded from the larger congregation as well. So I know that I really rattled off some of these interventions or some of these approaches very quickly. I'm happy to talk with you more about these ideas or talk with your congregations about how you might be able to support individuals. And I now want to turn it back to everybody for any questions or comments that you might have.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much to Mark, and I will hand it over back to Mark in 1 minute. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to post them in the Q&A section. I see a couple questions have come in to the chat box also, Mark. So I will mute myself again and let you take over, but it looks like we have a few questions coming in.
Right. So hopefully everybody can hear me. I think we were on. We were able to talk at the same time. So Sarah asks about whether or not I have any specific tools for staff working with community members who have dementia. And I would say I don't have any specific tools. A lot of these strategies are fairly generic for supporting anybody with differences in religious congregations. So I don't have any particular strategies for people with dementia per se. I would imagine some of the behavioral contracting might be helpful. Some of the circles of support might be helpful as well as some of the family supports to help the family member of this individual with dementia fully participate. So I don't have any particular tools in that area, and I'm not familiar with any as well, unfortunately. Is there a mental health first aid training you recommend? This is actually a great question. Because it reminds me that I didn't provide a lot of details about what mental health first aid is. It's actually a manualized educational intervention that started in Australia, I think about 10 years ago, and it's since come to the United States and been adopted by the National Council of Behavioral Health. So this is a national organization of community mental health providers. Each community is hopefully engaged in trying to offer this mental health first aid training. I guess my recommendation would be to contact the National Council and see if anybody is offering mental health first aid training in your particular area. If you would like their email, their internet address, just go ahead and send me an email, and I'm going to type it out here. My email address is msalzer@temple.edu. So if you'd like to find out more about the National Council and try to find out if there's mental health first aid training being offered in your area, I'd be able to help put you in contact with them. So I'm now moved over to the Q&A sections, and thank you, Lawrence, I appreciate it. Let's see, Sarah, dementia, Miriam, not all people with serious mental illness are obviously ill. How do we know if special support is needed, or know how to specifically encourage these folks to participate if they don't speak up or reach out? That is perfectly right on. I'm right on board with you on that. I think the whole idea of creating a welcoming environment that talks about mental health issues is one strategy that congregations use to encourage people who might not have disclosed their mental health issues to the congregation or to leadership or to other individuals in the congregation, that that might make them feel more comfortable in doing so, knowing that they will be safe and supported and that they won't experience prejudice or discrimination. So I think having those conversations, having those presentations, having people with lived experience of mental health issues talk about their experience, as well as the importance of religion in their lives, I think that that can hopefully create an atmosphere that allows people to disclose if they want to disclose. And I think, Miriam, part of your point that's excellent as well is there are actually likely many people in your congregations already who experience serious mental health issues, and they might not need necessarily any special support like I've been talking about today, but they might feel more welcomed in a congregation that at least talked about mental health issues in a very supportive and welcoming kind of way. So I definitely agree with that. Rachel, I appreciate that, Rachel. Just wondering, any colleagues or know of anyone doing work on disability and religious inclusion in Canada? I think that's probably something that Joe can answer. I don't know of people specifically doing work in Canada in the area of psychiatric disabilities. Unfortunately, I'm one of the few people I know who's talking about this, about mental health in religious congregations. There are other people who have done it, certainly, but our center is really focusing on that. Joe, do you have people that you can point Rachel to?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. So one of the things that we will do is we will provide resources along with this presentation. So for example, we'll provide the link to National Council and Mental Health First Aid and some of the different programs that Mark referenced in addition to your work, Mark. So once we put this up on our website, and I'll give that info at the end, it'll have all of that. And Rachel, I will also be in touch with you about your question, and anybody who has any questions can also feel free to follow up with me. Please do follow up with me at jrobbins@urj.org, and I'll type that in the chat box right now also.
All right. I'm going to get to Rebecca's comment in a second, but wanted to go to Heidi's first. It sounds like Heidi is already offering in their congregation mental health first aid, which is wonderful. I don't have any particular special strategies for drumming up interest. I do know that in some communities, people are doing basic 30 to 60-minute long presentations about mental health topics in particular to drum up interest, and then offering mental health first aid a couple of times a year to the congregations. You know, it's for some people, they have no interest in this. Some people, they're just busy with the rest of their lives and don't go to mental health first aid classes. So there are a lot of reasons why people don't participate. But I mean, I think the key is I would love to see any religious congregation have at least a couple of times a year talk about mental health issues, because it's, as well as other issues with other populations, and talk about inclusion as often as possible, email weekly, I mean, any of these things to talk about this issue. Rebecca, I hope everybody can see what Rebecca wrote, because this is unfortunately an experience that congregations do have. She wrote, "We have had mentally ill people who are not Jewish come for services. One of them frightened some members by his behaviors, which were not violent, but were odd, and he was a very large man. After a lengthy discussion with mental health experts, our board and rabbi, we eventually asked him not to return. I'm never sure if we did the right thing or not, and would appreciate my input." The first thing I would say is I would never say if it was right or wrong, because I don't know the particular circumstance, and there's lots of things that are going on. What I can say is, and I also don't know how important the fact that this individual was not Jewish, or how important that was to your decision as well. What I would say is that this does raise the issue of violence and serious mental illness that is probably the main driver of prejudice and discrimination towards people with serious mental illness. The bottom line is the evidence suggests that for the most part, people with serious mental illnesses, including schizophrenia, are not more violent than the general population, with one big caveat, unless drugs and alcohol are involved. If the person's actively using, then there is higher rates of substance use. So violence, people with serious mental illnesses aren't necessarily any more violent than the general population. There are other things that could have been done here, possibly. There could have been conversations about the individual's behavior, conversations about here are the rules, here's how we run our congregation, this is how we have our services, these are the expected behaviors, these are the things that we might be able to accommodate and make changes in our services to make it welcoming for you without disrupting the experience of other people. Here are the supports we can offer you. So there could have been those kind of conversations with the individual, but I could also imagine a congregation who, for whatever reason, decides not to go in that direction and have that conversation with the individual or their other loved ones. So I think two take-home messages that I'd like to offer. One is that violence message. Unfortunately, in this day and age, it is the boogeyman in the webinar here, where we're having lots of violent incidents, and there are lots of people who are calling themselves experts and politicians, blaming mental illness as a cause of this violence. And I can say the evidence suggests that this is not the case. That in general, people with serious mental illnesses are not more violent than the general population, with some, some exceptions to that, and that there are things that we can do to support individuals with these types of behavioral differences sometimes to participate in our religious communities, and they might not be things that we typically think about, but if we think about it as an impairment, as an illness-related thing that we can somehow accommodate or support that individual, then I would encourage you to consider doing that. So I see it's 3 o'clock. I really appreciate this opportunity to have dialogue. I'd be happy to hear from you in the future and provide even more information. I'm sorry I went kind of fast through some of the interventions. I focused more on sort of the lack of inclusion, and wish I would have focused more on the other stuff, but I'm available to you anytime, so just send me an email, give me a call. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark, again, for your expertise and your wisdom, and the Q&A session when Rabbi Edie Mencher, who's the coordinator of URJ Ruderman Disabilities Inclusion Initiative, and I were talking about what to do for Mental Health Awareness Month this year. We knew that all of these great questions that you proposed today on the webinar, everyone who joined us, and we thank you for joining us. We knew that they were questions that congregations and organizations across North America were having. And so the opportunity to have an expert like Mark with us and our other presenters, it has been great, and we hope you will be in touch with Mark and also with us with any questions that you have. We hope that you will take the resources, share them with other members of your congregations and organizations who maybe couldn't tune in today, and do reach out to us and take advantage of the resources that are available. We all work every day to make our congregations more inclusive and our world more inclusive for people with all types of differences, and mental health is such a such a strong need in all of our lives, whether we know it or not, like so many of the commenters and questions came in alluded to. So thank you again to Mark, and for today, you can visit the Disabilities Inclusion Learning Center, and in addition to all of our resources, there's a topic specifically on mental health that has all of the calls in this mental health learning opportunity that we've done so far. And we look forward to being in touch with all of you soon. Thank you so much for joining us today.